This image was captured just after sunset on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland southeast, and I really like this image because of its subtle tones in it. But look how much editing I've done in this image. Surely a raw file would need more editing than what can be seen here. Hello, I'm Charles from Charles in Photography. In today's Lightroom tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use range masks. Now, if you've never heard of range masks before, they've been in Lightroom for a while, and I thought I would actually show you how to use these tools in Lightroom. Now, most people, when they edit their photos in Lightroom, edit their photos globally, so the adjustments they use affect the whole image. Today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to edit your image locally, so selectively editing certain parts of the image without affecting the rest of the image. And this is a very good way of editing your image if you're only wanting to change, for example, the highlights or the shadows or the color in a certain section of the image without affecting the rest of the image. So now let's dive into our photo and I will show you how to use these tools. So for the sake of time, this is where we're going to start off today. So you can see here I've actually done just a small amount of editing to this image globally. So all the settings here have affected the image globally. I've cropped it a little bit. I've just reduced the highlights just that small amount. I've added a bit of clarity, a bit of dehaze, a bit of vibrance and a bit of saturation. And I've also increased the exposure just a slight amount. And I've selected my color profile as Adobe Landscape. So now I will show you how to use the range masks in Adobe Lightroom. Now, range masks can be used when you're using the graduated filter, the radial filter, or the tool. Now, before we get started in using the graduated filter, the radial filter, and the brush tool, if you're not familiar with these tools, then take a look at this video tutorial that I did on just these tools, how to use them effectively when you're editing your images. So first, we'll actually use a graduated filter. Now, if you're familiar with the graduated filter, this is what it looks like. It drops down here. So we're going to put a graduated filter on the right-hand side of this image here. So this is a small trick here. I hold down the Shift key before I press it. Now, if I hold the Shift key down, when I press the graduated filter, I have to go to the right. And if I go to the right, then I'll select Mask Overlay. You can see that I've actually affected the image here. So this is on this side of the image. I've actually pushed the graduated filter to the right, which means that the left side of the filter has been affected. We have our graduated filter now, you can see it. I'll unclick Mask Overlay. Now, we're not going to touch any of these sliders at the moment, because if we do, we're actually going to be affecting the whole image. But remember, we're wanting to affect our image locally, so selectively editing it. This filter, we're actually going to be controlling our shadows. You can see in the foreground here and in the mountain, there's quite a lot of shadows. This is where we use the range mask. You can see it down here, range mask, off. We want to click on and we want the Luminance range mask. Now look, it's popped down a little box down here. We have show luminance mask, the range and the smoothness. The range means what you want to affect in the image. So if we want this mask to affect the highlights, we slide it right. If we want the range mask to affect our shadows, we slide it to the left. If I hold down the Alt key now, and if I wanted to affect the highlights, this is what I do. I grab it from the left here and slowly slide it to the right, while holding the Alt key. This is on a PC. On a Mac, it's the Option key. And you can see here, as I'm sliding it slowly, you can see all the shadows come in. Now, all the black area here now is not being affected by this range mask, by this neutral density filter. Now, I've also got smoothness here. Now, I don't want it smooth. And if I bring it to the left here, all the way down, can you see that I've really got very sharp cut-off lines? This is the blending effect, so I don't want it that much. I'm going to come back to around 30, maybe about 35. I'm very happy with this. But this mask at the moment is affecting my highlights. I don't want it to affect my highlights. So I will slide the left slider all the way back to the left, and I will grab the right slider, and now I will slide it, the right slider, to the left. This is going to affect my shadows, and this is what I want to do. And you can see here now, everything is white are shadows, and this is the area that I want to affect. You can see the sky isn't selected, but everything that's in white or grey is being affected by this range mask. So I'm happy with this. This is where I want it. I can come up here to the exposure. I can actually lift my exposure slightly, and I can also affect the colour. Do I want to cool it down? Do I want to warm it up? Now remember, it's only affecting the shadow area in this, so it's not affecting the whole lot, because where the areas were grey, it's only going to be around a 50%. This is why you don't see a lot of difference here. It's a little bit warm because it's twilight, so I'm just going to cool it down just slightly. I'm going to add a little bit of clarity, a bit of texture, a little bit of contrast, and a small amount of dehaze. This will actually just grungy it up a bit. It'll give us some nice definition on these foreground rocks. Now look at that. We've already gotten quite a lot of detail here. So it looks quite nice. Also come down, desaturate it a little bit more. Now if I slide all the way to the left, you can see that the saturation hasn't affected the whole lot. I'll bring it back up. If I want to see a bigger change, then I have to come back down here to the range mask and slide it slightly more, and also bring the smoothness down a little bit more, and this will define the area a lot more. At the moment, I'm really happy with this. I can probably add a bit more clarity. Now that looks a bit better, and a little bit more texture. There, I'm really happy with that. Now, I just did the shadows. If you wanted to do one for the highlights, then all you'd have to do is click it again. And I like to keep things separate, so we would actually put the other graduated filter for the highlights on our left. So we click on graduated filter, come to the left here, click it, and I'm holding and going to the left. And if I click mask overlay, you can see the graduated filter has been added. Now I click on Luminance, the box opens up, and remember here I actually want the highlight, so I click the range mask and I go all the way to the right, bring the smoothness down a little bit. That's it. Now I can actually reduce the highlights here a bit, add more saturation, add more warmth, saturate the image a bit more. There, look at that. Look at our highlights now. It's starting to look really nice. Now I'm not going to add much clarity or texture to this because it's very soft in the sky. There's no clouds, so I'm happy with it right there. Now the next range mask I'm going to use, the Radial Filter, and this is such a good filter to use for this. Now you can see these rocks in the bottom left hand foreground here. Can you see how they've got that sort of warmish tone because it's that time of the day? But in real life, these rocks were actually a bit bluish. So I'm actually going to replicate this in this photo. So I'm going to add the Radial Filter, spin it around a bit, because I want to cover all these rocks. Fatten it up, spin it down. Now you can see I'm actually covering more than these rocks, but that's okay. Now, before I go any further, if I click on Mask Overlay here, you can see that I'm working on the inside of the Radial Filter because I have clicked Invert. Now, if I unclick Invert, I'm actually working on the outside of it. So if you want to affect outside of this filter, then that's how you do it. You unselect Invert. If you want to work inside the area, you select Invert. We want inside, so we select Invert. Now, I'll unclick Mask Overlay, and I'll come down here to the range mask, and this time we're not going to select luminance. We're going to select color. So we select color, and you can see it's actually showing us an eyedropper. So I click the eyedropper, and when you're using the eyedropper in this mask, you're actually choosing the color that you want to affect. So I'm going to affect this darker area here. So I'm going to click on this dark area there. And you can see here, I've actually got a color picker now. I've got this little marker. Now I can actually cool this area down. You can see, like, look, see it's gone bluish, or warm it up. So what did I say I wanted? I wanted to cool it down, to bring it back natural. That looks very good. Now, I can also affect the saturation, desaturate it, saturate a little bit more. We're going to cool it down a little bit more. Plus, we're going to make a little bit green. Yeah, that looks quite good. Now, in most images, when you edit them, you're trying to get a three-dimensional picture, because this is how our brains look at images. We don't want a two-dimensional. So if you're editing shadows and all that, so when you're editing shadows, bring them all the way up, because you want that difference between your highlights and your shadows and your midtones. So here, down on the bottom left-hand corner, I'm actually bringing these rocks back to where they were, to a bluer, and this will actually get the bluer's eye down there, and then it'll just lead them into the bigger rocks, into the other mountain cliff in the background, and into our beautiful sky at the end. So this looks quite good. I'll add a little bit more clarity to this area here, because I want to give it a little bit of punch, a bit of dehaze, a bit of texture again, and some contrast. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the slider for the amount to show how much of this area I actually want changed. Now I grab the Alt key, and can you see the area outside of our area here of the radial filters has reduced. And if I keep reducing the amount, can you see how selectively you're actually affecting your color? Now look, it's actually really just picked out the bigger rocks in the center, and that's exactly what I wanted. Look at that. We've actually got a very good definition between the two, but it's not a hard line. It's a gradual effect, and it looks very real. And this is what it actually looked like on this night. Now I'll click the radial filter again, and I'll come up here and I'll select mask overlay, just so we can see it. I'll select it and I'll click duplicate. This means that I've got a second radial filter now. And watch what happens when I move this duplicate around. Can you see the green areas? This is the only place where this filter would be applied. Can you see down here? And if I come back here, can you see it's affecting just certain areas? It's affecting it in that blue area that we selected with the eyedropper. We chose a color, and color now is being found in this area where you see it, right in the bottom right hand corner, and in the mountain area down there. It's also looking at the shadows. So if I want to replicate what I just did in those rocks here, I don't have to start from scratch again, re-choose the color. I've got it all here. So I can actually move it up to the mountain here fairly quickly, reduce the filter size, there. And if I select unmask, look at it, perfect. Didn't actually do anything else. So can you see how easy it was to actually duplicate and actually copy our settings to another area of our image? Now the last range mask I want to add and to show you is when we're using the brush tool. So I click the brush tool here. I'm going to add a bit of feather. I've got the mask overlay clicked on, and I just want to affect this small area here. I can reduce it down a little bit. The reason I want to affect this area here is because I just want to tone down the shadows here. I actually want to darken just this a little bit to actually give us a bit of definition breakdown between the blue area and the very bright area of the rocks. And also this area here should be slightly darker. So we click mask overlay off. Now I come to the range mask and I want luminance again. I'll hold the Alt key. So we want shadows. So I bring it back there. Look at that. Now I'll bring the smoothness down because I don't want a huge area here. That looks very good. Now watch what happens when I use the exposure slider. Can you see that it's just darkened that area up a little bit? That looks so good. And I can actually saturate it slightly. There. Add a little bit of clarity and a bit of texture. Now can you see what I've done? We've actually got a very good transition from the darker areas to the brighter areas. And now I'm just looking at these shadows and I feel that it's just a little bit too strong. So I will just back it off a little bit. And that's it. I'm very happy with that. If I click done, that's it. Our image is finished. Now, if I wanted to finish just to touch up the image globally, I can actually come up here. I can either increase the exposure or decrease the exposure. And this is going to affect my image globally. Understand that now we're affecting everything. So I can increase it slightly. That looks really good. Now I'm going to reduce the highlights overall a little bit more. I'm going to add just a little bit more saturation. So you can see how easily it was to actually edit this image. Now I'll quickly show you what the before and after looked like. So we come down here to YY and look at this. The left side is our raw file. The right side is our edited image. Can you see how nice it looks? And this is why I tell people it's so good to shoot in RAW, because if you had been shooting in JPEG, you couldn't do this much editing. So now that you've seen how to use these range masks, this will give you some motivation to use these in your editing workflow, because you've seen they are so easy to use and you don't have to go to town on editing your image globally for the whole image. You can just do just a little bit of basic editing, like cropping, reducing the highlights a bit if you want to increase the shadows a bit, get your exposure right, and then go about and selectively edit certain parts of your image. Then you end up with a very nice image. You've controlled the highlights, you've controlled the shadows, you've controlled the midtones, you've controlled the color in the whole image. Now I've only used just a few of the range masks here, but you could really go to town if you wanted to by just selecting certain areas of the image, adjusting the color, adjusting the brightness or the shadows. So if you've gotten value from this video tutorial, give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate that you subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm Charles from Charles in Photography. See you next time.